Every day, whether we notice it or not, someone is deciding what we learn. A developer working on a tech platform, a policymaker, an algorithm. Over this season, it became clear how much the struggle over knowledge, what counts, who decides, and who has access, how it's shaping our future. During season 2 of Educating to be Human, we ask the questions that are not necessarily obvious. In classrooms, community programs, and in places where people learn, who controls what we learn, who benefits, who gets left out, and simply, why do we learn? I spoke with people across disciplines, community organizers, faith leaders, educators, civil servants, and business leaders to chip away at these questions from different angles. And as the season unfolded, one truth rose to the top, which is that we can't democratize access to learning until we put the human back at the center. Because while access to information has seemingly widened, the barriers to meaningful knowledge, whose stories matter, and who are the gatekeepers of cultural memory, they've only grown more complex and opaque. Democratizing access to learning isn't just about opening doors. It's about reclaiming education as a public good that we all participate in. So in this special episode of Educating to be Human, I revisit key moments and quotes with our guests from Season 2, highlighting how they challenged us to think of what becomes possible when we center humans, not systems, in learning.
Several years ago, Amazon recalled copies of 1984 off of people's Kindles. Just disappeared your copy of 1984. No warning, just gone. That's bad.
So control over knowledge is one of the perhaps not so quiet forces shaping our world today. Our guest this season reminded us that education is shaped by memory and access, power, and the systems that we inherit.
And then there's kind of a more existential threat to the future of libraries and barriers to access to information. And that's the move from building library collections via an ownership model, like buying physical books, to what's happening today more and more, which is a licensing model, just leasing temporary access to collections rather than owning them outright. It's scary to think that flash forward in 20 years, our libraries could just be all digital and we could own nothing. And then that means we're just beholden to the corporate entities that own those books and that allow us to have access to them.
That was Chris Friedland, Director of Library Services at the Internet Archive. And he helped us see libraries not simply as buildings with books inside, but as institutions of public memory. When access to knowledge becomes dependent on licensing and commercial platforms, we've no longer simply asking what do we read, but who decides what gets preserved and who gets to see it. So while Chris showed us how libraries shape public memory, Maha Bali reminded us that the digital world now carries its own invisible gatekeepers.
We're not approaching technology from a social justice perspective. We're not looking at the power dynamics that are shifted when we use technology. I think we're delegating and agreeing to give up our agency, our identity, our accountability. And those three things are really important. And we're also then potentially harming our students, especially those who are most marginalized by this.
Maha Bali, a leading voice in digital pedagogy and open education, challenged us to think about the digital layer of control. We spoke together about how the values embedded in our tools shape what students see and believe, and often leave out the most marginalized among us. And in this world, mediated by algorithms and AI today, digital literacy becomes not just a skill, but a necessity.
When you have a place where people hate, when you have a place where people have contempt for another country, another group of people, it makes it easier to be in conflict, to be at war, to hurt someone. But when you know that they're members of a community just like yours, when you know that they have a family just like yours, that they have parents, whether they have kids or not, they have kids around them, And it just humanizes it for everyone. And I think that has been hugely successful, not just for the United States, but for almost every country.
That was Paul Kruchoski, who highlighted how learning across borders can foster understanding and peace. Public diplomacy, he reminded us, is fundamentally educational. We learn so much more deeply in direct communication in public diplomacy initiatives like the Open Book Project or Fulbright scholarships, and he highlighted how these kinds of initiatives are really instruments of peace. And yet, control over knowledge isn't just about technology or international programs. It's also about whose experiences are counted. Joanna Strober highlighted the ways systemic gaps in healthcare knowledge leave millions of women unheard, reminding us that reclaiming knowledge means reclaiming the stories that have been ignored.
50% of women don't apply for raises because of perimenopause symptoms. 25% think about quitting their jobs. 10% do quit their jobs. And then it also shows that women often go to doctors, and when they are not given the appropriate treatments from those doctors, they are more likely to then quit their jobs.
Founder of MIDI Health, Joanna, shows that menopause is not a weakness. It's a stage of life that can be understood and navigated and owned. By listening to women, centering them in research and care, and speaking openly about menopause, we can improve midlife healthcare outcomes. From who controls what we learn, we turn to how we learn. In a system today in education that is increasingly fractured, really narrowing learning and our sense of connection to body, nature, and emotion. But true learning is embodied, relational, and experiential.
I believe in the power of horses and the power of nature to really bring us back in touch with our innate being, our authentic self.
Through her work with horses, Wendy Millett, founder of Gallup Ventures, invited us back into our bodies and into nature. We learn how horses act as mirrors of our inner selves, the limits of conventional education, and what it means to reclaim embodied learning in an increasingly disembodied world. So learning isn't just intellectual, it's emotional, physical, and relational.
One of the lessons from working with animals on the ranch and working with my team, who are people working on the land and in nature, is we are mammals also. And we are evolutionarily adapted to moving our bodies a lot, walking around for food, growing food. Like that's what we did for so many thousands of years. And so even just the simple nature of being in our body, giving kids exercises to do, hopefully they could get outside also, because there's so many benefits of being in contact with nature. But even just to work with our hands and giving people an exercise to do, or, sometimes when we have kids programs here, I think about how many people who grew up in an urban area or even grew up and didn't get outside to play, they might not really understand gravity. They might not really understand how water moves. Like you miss some very fundamental things if you don't have a lived physical experience of how the world works.
From the field into the classroom, we spoke with Atman Smith, co-founder of the Holistic Life Foundation, which brings mindfulness and yoga practices into school. Atman showed us that learning begins with regulation, breath, the nervous system, safety. What looks like mindfulness is really a radical shift in school culture, replacing disciplinary actions like detention with presence through meditation.
We are helping shift systems. Like, if you look at the educational system, now everybody is trying to change detention to meditation. We're changing what it means to deal with a kid that is quote unquote a problem kid or acting out on some of the trauma that they're dealing with in their life, and giving them, instead of making it punitive, making it empowering. And I think that's very hopeful.
Stephen Ritz, founder of the Green Rock Machine, essentially asked us, what if learning began not with a textbook, but with a seed?
We have forgotten that we are part of a larger ecosystem. So my work moves from being about ourselves to a greater good. But the cool thing about plants is that inherently they will grow no matter what. There's no floaters at the top of the tank. There's no poop to scoop. There's nothing that eats their young. There's no farting or talking back. I mean, plants are amazing. And so are children. And the notion of taking care of a plant has to do with giving it the right environment. And, when we see plants thrive, we see kids thrive.
Stephen's journey revealed how growing food in schools can ignite curiosity and connect students to nature. For him, a seed is curriculum, ecology, nutrition, science, community. In classrooms from the Bronx to around the world, he showed us that growing food grows connection to self, to others, and to the planet. Turning to purpose, we asked, what is the point of educating? Education is about building community, taking action, and fostering resilience. And as threats to access and equity grow, we must ensure that learning cultivates critical thinking and remains a force for progress. By building connections, engaging deeply, and being active knowledge seekers, we can persist in the face of challenges and continue to drive meaningful change.
That question that's out there is like, is it really worth it? And we have to be able to articulate that in a different way. And I think that's going to be one of our biggest challenges, is that elevator pitch about why is community college important. I see it. I see the stories of our students. I see it. I have experienced it over the last 20 years. But we have to make sure that we're all able to see it and articulate it and why it's important.
That was Dr. Keith Curry, president of Compton College. He framed education as hope in action. When schools address real human needs, such as food and housing and textbooks, students can focus on the learning that transforms their lives and their communities. The interview with Keith highlighted how education is inseparable from care and community, because when we uplift students, we uplift society.
The oldest sign, oldest indication of human civilization is a healed femur, because that would indicate that the humanoid that was injured was cared for rather than left and kind of cutting one's losses, that this member of this group of humanoids had felt that it was important that we need to kind of stay together, and including this weak person, this link that isn't the strongest. And so that indicated that there was a decision of care. So that would indicate that at the core of our humanity and what defines us isn't these separations, but is our ability to care and heal. And through that kind of impulse, religions kind of evolved as a technology to pull out of the best of humanity our ability to connect to each other and to connect to the divine.
With Father John Pedigo, a priest and a social justice activist, we explored what it means to rebuild connection in a time of deep division. He showed us how faith and the impulse to care presents an opportunity to build community, to cultivate empathy, and to take action for the greater good. Grassroots organizing, he argued, allows people to claim their agency and voice.
Educating to be human is about how do we actually is taking history class and civics class a little bit further and say that your vote, we're in a democracy, theoretically, where your vote is your own vote. And at the same time, it should not just be about the self, but that's also our capitalist environment. So we're a democracy, but we're also capitalist. So we tend, or at least I grew up with the narrative that you just have to think for yourself. I would like to challenge that narrative and say that civics and history classes are to actually challenge dominant narratives, to discover new ways of existing with each other. And your vote actually is for all. So your vote is not just for what would be good for you, because that's too contextual. It's like for middle class white women who are heterosexual, I'd be voting no on a lot of things, right? Because I have access to a lot. You're voting for all. And that is how I would like students to think about their vote is not just what do you like, it's what would be good for your local context, for your state context, for your nation.
With Kassi Talbot, we turned our attention to rural education and the power of community-centered learning. Like Father John, she emphasized the importance of building connection in a time of a divided world. And through participatory and equitable and community-based approaches, Kassi reminded us that education drives positive outcomes, not just in the remote and rural schools, but across all systems of learning. This season of Educating to be Human explored the forces shaping education today, who controls knowledge, how learning is deepened through embodied experience, and why education matters for resilience and connection. The barriers to accessing knowledge have never been greater, shaped by questions of who decides, what is valued, and therefore what we learn. So remember, democratizing access to learning is not just about open access. It's about reclaiming education as a shared and participatory process. So from the halls of diplomacy to the classroom gardens of the Bronx, from community schools to the wisdom found in our own bodies in the natural world, one lesson clearly emerges. Educating to be human is when education helps us become more fully ourselves and connected with one another. Thank you for joining us this season. May we continue to learn, question, and reclaim knowledge in ways that honor our shared humanity.